In the heart of the dense Guatemalan jungle, ancient stone giants rise above the emerald canopy. Tikal's soaring temples and Palenque's intricate palaces stand as silent testaments to a civilization that once ruled this world with unmatched brilliance. Yet today, these monuments lie half-swallowed by twisting vines and creeping moss. How could a people capable of unraveling the secrets of the heavens, mastering complex hieroglyphs, and engineering vast urban centers simply disappear? Imagine standing on a high plaza at dawn, mist swirling around pyramid summits, the distant cry of howler monkeys echoing like a lament. You feel the weight of centuries pressing in, as if the very stones remembered a time when these courts thrummed with royal processions, sacrificial ceremonies, and the roar of crowded ball courts. What stories lie buried beneath layers of earth, waiting to be uncovered? And why, despite centuries of archaeological triumphs, does the core mystery remain? Why did the classic Maya collapse? This is not a tale of a single cataclysm. It is a mosaic of fading glory, each shard revealing a fragment of the broader collapse. In the chapters to come, we will journey through this intricate web, tracing pulses of drought hidden in tree rings, unearthing the scars of internecine warfare, and probing the silent specter of disease. We will peer into the shattered reservoirs and eroded fields that once fed millions. And we will listen for the whispers of survivors, communities who carried fragments of Maya identity into the modern world, defying oblivion. But first, let us linger on this moment of juxtaposition, the grandeur of what was against the hush of what remains. The Maya built their cities to align with celestial movements, carving calendars that still astonish today. They painted stories on stucco walls, inscribed destinies in stone, and wove the rhythm of time into the very fabric of their urban planning. Yet as birds wheel overhead and monkeys chatter unseen, nature reclaims its own, and the silence grows louder. Why does this silence feel so profound? Because it hints at something deeper than mere abandonment. It suggests that the collapse was not simply the disappearance of people, but the unraveling of an entire way of life. Imagine the shock as spring rains failed for decade after decade, crops withered, and famines gripped the lowland plains. Picture rival city-states, once bound by trade and diplomacy, turning swords on each other in desperation. Envision epidemics coursing through crowded compounds, turning bustling plazas into ghost towns overnight. Finally, see the grand plazas emptying, shrines closing, and priests falling silent as the old gods no longer spoke through their priests. Yet even in the face of such ruin, the Maya spirit did not vanish. Today, 6 million Maya people speak descendants of those ancient languages, K'ich, Yucatec Mam, continuing ceremonies that echo rituals performed 1,000 years ago. Their resilience reminds us that collapse is never total. Culture endures in the soil, in the stories passed from parent to child. As we set out on this exploration, keep one question close. What does the Maya collapse teach us about the fragility and resilience of complex societies? In a world grappling with climate change, resource depletion, and social strife, their story feels eerily familiar. Could the same forces that unraveled the classic Maya be stirring beneath our own modern landscapes? Over the next chapters, we will dissect each piece of this puzzle. We will stand on the shores of once full reservoirs, decipher the coded warnings of drought buried in limestone caves, and listen to the echoes of past conflicts etched in broken stele. We will challenge single-cause explanations and seek a synthesis that embraces the profound complexity of human systems. Now, as the jungle mists part to reveal another sunlit temple, let us step forward together into the mystery. The stones have stories to tell, if only we know how to listen. At its height, the classic Maya world was a tapestry of powerful city-states, each ruled by divine kings whose authority rested on both martial prowess and cosmic favor. Picture Yaxchilan's royal courts buzzing with diplomats bearing jade and cacao, while Palenque's scribes labored over glyph-inscribed codices under the soft glow of oil lamps. These were not isolated hamlets but metropolitan hubs, home to tens of thousands of inhabitants, complete with bustling marketplaces and intricate alliances woven across hundreds of miles of jungle and lowland plains. How did the Maya achieve such organizational mastery? Their political system balanced fierce autonomy with occasional confederations, alliances sealed by marriage, tribute, and mutual defense. Monarchs like Pakal the Great at Palenque commissioned monumental inscriptions to legitimize their lineages, while in Kapan, a succession of dynastic rulers erected stelae that recorded victories, calendrical events, and cosmic omens. Through these public texts, the populace was reminded daily of the ruler's sacred mandate, anchoring social cohesion in a shared religious-political worldview. Beneath this veneer of ritual and pageantry lay an economy rooted in ingenious agriculture and far-flung trade. The Maya harnessed the fertile swamp-pockmarked bajos with raised fields and drainage systems that nourished maize, beans, and squash. In the uplands, terraced hillsides held back erosion, while chinampas, man-made islands, burst with chili peppers and amaranth. Beyond sustenance, obsidian blades glinted in Tikal's markets, cacao beans served as currency, and salt from coastal lagoons traveled inland in wooden canoes. Can you imagine the clamor as traders exchanged exotic feathers, jade beads, and shell ornaments, each item a thread in a vibrant economic web? Their intellectual achievements matched their political and economic prowess. Maya astronomers charted Venus's cycle with astonishing precision, predicting its heliacal rising to within a handful of days. Priests recorded solar eclipses in the Dresden Codex, using intricate tables that rival modern pen and paper calculations. And then there was the long count calendar, a linear chronology spanning millennia, carved into stone monuments to mark dynastic inaugurations and cosmic eras. How profound must it have felt to live under a civilization whose very concept of time was both cyclical and eternal. Language, too, was elevated to an art form. Maya hieroglyphs combined logograms and syllabic signs into poetic stanzas etched on temple walls and folded bark paper books. Through these glyphs, narratives of mythic creation and royal triumph were preserved for posterity. Imagine the hush that fell over an audience as a priest read an accession inscription, stories of hero twins outwitting underworld gods echoing in a plaza lined with onlookers. Such dramatic recitations reinforced the bonds between ruler, priesthood, and commoner, reminding every listener that they were part of a grand cosmic drama. Then consider the physical stage upon which these dramas unfolded. Pyramids soared skyward, their steep stairways cut into limestone, leading to sanctuaries crowned with corbelled vaults. Ball courts, some nearly 200 feet long, hosted the ritual sport Pakatak, where victory and sacrifice intertwined. Palaces sprawled across plazas, their stucco facades painted in vibrant reds and blues. Can you feel the resonance as the sun's first rays hit the temple of the inscriptions, illuminating Pakal's tomb below? These architectural marvels were not mere monuments. They were instruments of power, engineered to align with solstices and equinoxes, reinforcing the belief that Maya rulers acted in concert with celestial rhythms. By weaving together politics, economy, science, language, and architecture, the Maya constructed a civilization of breathtaking complexity. It was a society where the priestly caste decoded the movements of stars, farmers coaxed crops from challenging terrain, and rulers commissioned art that still speaks across centuries. Yet, in this story of triumph, we begin to glimpse the fragility inherent in such interdependence. What happens when climate shifts disrupt harvests, when trade routes fracture under political strain, or when a single epidemic shatters public confidence in divine protection? As we marvel at the zenith of Maya achievement, we also set the stage for the unraveling to come. In the next chapter, we will follow the first warning tremors, a series of devastating droughts that chipped away at this mighty empire's foundations. But before we move on, let me know if you'd like any adjustments to this depiction of Maya brilliance, or if we're ready to press forward into the shadows of cracks in the foundation. By the turn of the 6th century CE, subtle tremors rippled through the heart of Maya society, so faint at first that most would not notice. But when scholars drilled core samples from ancient lakebeds and counted the dark bands in tree rings, a clear pattern emerged: decades-long droughts that choked rivers and desiccated reservoirs. Imagine a farmer in Tikal's hinterlands, watching his maize wither under an unrelenting sun, and hearing the once mighty channels run dry. What happens when the very lifeblood of civilization, water, becomes scarce? In stalactite-laden caves beneath the Yucatan, dripping calcite recorded these shifts in mineral layers, each layer a snapshot of rainfall and evaporation. Archaeologists compare oxygen isotopes in those dripstones to modern readings, revealing that the late Classic period suffered not one, but multiple severe drought pulses. These were not brief interludes. They span years, even decades, each dry season compounding the previous. With every failed rainy season, food storage emptied, tributes shrank, and famine whispers spread from one city-state to the next. Yet the Maya did not sit idle. They built massive raised fields in lowland swamps, elevated platforms flanked by canals designed to hold water during dry spells. They carved reservoirs behind stone dams, carefully lining them to minimize seepage. In some regions, cenotes, natural sinkholes, served as communal lifelines, their cool waters revered as portals to the underworld. But consider this: even the most ingenious engineering falters if a drought persists long enough. When rainfall slipped below critical thresholds year after year, these reservoirs shrank to mud flats, and canals became dusty trenches. As food scarcity tightened its grip, social fault lines began to surface. Once cooperative city-states turned inward, hoarding resources. Elites redirected labor from temple construction to repairing reservoirs and erecting new, shallow wells. Priests implored the gods for mercy, staging frantic ceremonies beneath parched skis, yet omens carved on stele grew ominous, glyphs lamenting spears of drought and voices of the dead land. How would commoners interpret these portents? Was divine wrath smoldering in the heavens, or had humanity simply overreached against nature's limits? Inscriptions from sites like Deus Pilas hint at political turmoil, fermented by environmental stress. Kings boasting of victory and conquest mask the deeper struggle for fertile land and water rights. As tributary networks faltered, the flow of goods, obsidian, jade, cacao, dwindled. Local elites, once buttressed by lavish trade, found their coffers bare. City councils fractured along lines of resource access, and rival factions vied for dwindling fields. What began as a hydrological crisis evolved swiftly into social upheaval. Archaeobotanical records further illuminate the crisis. Pollen cores from swampy bajos show a decline in maize pollen matched by a surge of weedy grasses, species that thrive in eroded, nutrient-poor soils. This botanical shift signals not only drought, but also over-farming and soil exhaustion. With each planting season, fields yielded less, requiring more land to sustain the same population. Forests, already cleared for agriculture, failed to regenerate, and hillside terraces crumbled under torrential storms that followed years of aridity. The land literally turned against its cultivators. How do you govern a kingdom when every harvest feels like a gamble? Rulers doubled down on ritual display, erecting new temples to placate the gods, commissioning ball court games to reinforce social bonds. They offered lavish sacrifices, pressing more captives into service. Yet these public acts of faith, meant to restore cosmic balance, grew increasingly hollow as famine and unrest gnawed at the populace. The very ceremonies that once unified now served as reminders of mounting desperation. By the time drought returned with renewed fury in the late 7th century, the social contract between ruler and ruled had weakened. In some cities, elite families abandoned royal palaces, retreating to fortified compounds. Commoners fled starving fields for the forest edges, seeking firewood and wild tubers. Cemeteries expanded as malnutrition and disease claimed lives in the streets. Once bustling plazas, staging grounds of power and communal identity, fell eerily silent. Yet even amidst this unraveling, resilience flickered. In upland refugia and along riverbanks less affected by drought, small communities adapted. They diversified crops, planting drought-resistant tepary beans and cactus fruits, and revived ancient water harvesting techniques learned centuries earlier. These pockets of survival hint at why the collapse was uneven, city by city, rather than a single, synchronous event. As the sun sets on this chapter of environmental crisis, one central question remains. Were prolonged droughts the catalyst that triggered the cascade of social and political failures, or merely the first in a series of blows that would ultimately extinguish classic Maya civilization? In the next chapter, we turn from the ravages of nature to the ravages of war, the human conflicts ignited by desperation, ambition, and a quest for survival. As drought's merciless grip tightened, the tinder of Maya society lay primed for ignition, and when sparks flew, the world of city-states erupted into flames of internecine warfare. Imagine the tension in the jungle air as rival armies marched along concealed causeways, war banners snapping in the humid breeze. What happens when unity fractures and former allies brandish obsidian-tipped spears against one another? How does desperation transform the sacred plaza into a battleground? In the late 7th century, sites like Dos Pilas became epicenters of this violent upheaval. There, we find glyphic records of King Bialaj Chan, Kayawil's dramatic defection from his father's court, and subsequent alliance with Tikal's arch-rivals. His betrayal, etched into stone with language dripping in contempt, reveals the personal ambitions fueling political schisms. As you listen, ask yourself, when family betrayal intertwines with royal intrigue, can ritual and tradition withstand the assault of human greed? Kapan's fall offers another chilling vignette. Once a cultural beacon famed for its exquisite stele, Kapan found itself besieged by forces from Quirigua. In a single, stunning coup, Kayak, Tiluchan Yapat captured Kapan's king, Waxaclajun Yuba Kayawil, executing him in a public spectacle that shattered the myth of divine protection. Imagine the horror of commoners watching their monarch humbled, his blood offering a stark warning that no throne was safe. Can you feel the tremor of fear as cities realized that cosmic favor could be wrested away by mortal hands? These clashes were not random raids but highly organized campaigns, leveraging cavalry of slingers and archers, forced conscription of captives into ritual sacrifice, and strategic targeting of waterworks and granaries. When warriors raised reservoirs, they weaponized drought. When they tore down irrigation canals, they unleashed famine's specter. Priests recorded such outrages in sanctified texts, lamenting the city that thirsted as swords cut its veins. What must it have felt like to watch your lifeline drained, knowing the enemy held your fate? Yet the fires of conflict did more than scorch fields and topple thrones. They rewove the very fabric of Maya identity. City alliances shifted with dizzying speed. One dynasty would pledge tribute to its neighbor today and forge a murder pact tomorrow. As a viewer, consider how fragile loyalties become when survival is at stake. How easily does shared heritage slip from memory when survival demands betrayal? In these turbulent years, some rulers even invoked ancestral deities of war, Chak of the lightning bolt, Ka'awil of divine sovereignty, to legitimize campaigns of conquest. Theologians and generals became one, binding cosmic order to military might. Amid this chaos, the human cost was staggering. Archaeological digs unearth mass graves where dozens of skeletons lie haphazardly, some bound, others bearing sword cuts and arrow tips lodged in bone. What do these silent witnesses tell us about the desperation of the defeated and the ruthlessness of victors? Did these victims believe they would be spared if they confessed their allegiance? Or did they choose death over dishonor? And yet, even in war's darkest furnace, sparks of resilience glowed. Smaller polities, unaligned with imperial ambitions, adapted by forming federations of mutual defense, sharing resources, pooling labor to rebuild waterworks, and rotating priestly duties to maintain religious cohesion. These networks, less visible in grand inscriptions, hint at a countercurrent of cooperation beneath the surface of collapse. As we step back from the smoldering ruins of battlefields, one question still burns. Were these wars mere symptoms of deeper decay, or did they accelerate the unraveling beyond recovery? In the next chapter, we turn our gaze to an invisible enemy, pathogens that preyed on weakened bodies and shattered remaining confidence in divine protection. As warfare and famine ravaged the Maya lowlands, another, less visible threat slipped through the cracks of their crumbling cities: epidemic disease. Imagine crowded palace compounds and bustling marketplaces where the exchange of jade and cacao once thrived, now breeding grounds for pathogens unleashed by malnutrition and water scarcity. How vulnerable is a society when its people's bodies are already weakened by starvation, their immune defenses stretched thin? Skeletal remains from late classic cemeteries reveal telltale marks of nutritional stress: porotic hyperostosis, dental enamel hypoplasia, signs that childhood illnesses compounded poor diets. But recent biomolecular studies go further, extracting ancient DNA from dental pulp to identify microbial culprits. Malaria parasites, evidenced by Plasmodium falciparum DNA, may have surged in stagnant water canals left unrepaired during drought, turning irrigation channels into mosquito nurseries. Can you picture the irony of life-saving innovations morphing into death traps? Beyond malaria, hemorrhagic fevers, possibly related to aeronaviruses, are theorized based on pathological lesions observed on vertebrae and ribs. These diseases, characterized by high fatality rates and rapid person-to-person transmission, could decimate entire neighborhoods before priests had time to process omens or organize funerary rites. Imagine the terror as families watched loved ones droop with fever, blood seeping from orifices, as ritual chants and sacrificial offerings failed to stem the tide. Marshy bajos surrounding cities, once vital for agriculture, became marshlands teeming with disease vectors. Epidemics likely struck in waves, first in the aftermath of drought when water tables were low, then again during sudden floods that dispersed pathogens over larger areas. This cycle of ecological boom and bust created corridors of contagion linking city to city. Traders and pilgrims, previously carriers of exotic goods and sacred knowledge, now carried illness in their wake. How could priests read divine will when disease struck without pattern? Glyphic inscriptions on repaired stelae go silent around common ages of death, but courtly texts obscure details of calamity with flowery praise for deities. We must read between these lines. Mass burial pits, hastily dug, hint at the sheer scale of mortality. Skeletal clusters at sites like Yaxchilan and Piedras Negras show multiple individuals interred without grave goods, anomalous in a culture that prized funerary offerings. These hurried burials betray fear, fear that sacred soil tainted by death might poison the community. Yet disease did not strike uniformly. Highland strongholds, perched above swampy lowlands, report fewer sudden mortality spikes. Their cooler climates and better-maintained water cisterns offered relative refuge. In these pockets, Maya populations reorganized around smaller kin-based villages, reviving communal health measures, isolating the ill in forested infirmaries, boiling water in clay urns, and using herbal remedies derived from native flora. These grassroots responses echo modern concepts of quarantine and public health, hinting at sophisticated empirical knowledge even amid collapse. Still, the psychological blow of invisible assailants was profound. When priests could no longer promise protection against mortal illness, the divine contract frayed. Confidence in both king and cosmos waned. If rituals failed to forestall widespread death, what authority remained sacred? And so, as epidemics raged, civic rituals dwindled, ball court games ceased, public offerings slowed, and urban centers fell into deeper silence. By the end of the 8th century, disease had hollowed out surviving populations, leaving surviving elites too few to maintain bureaucratic order. The specter of sickness, entwined with drought and war, shattered any lingering hope for revival. Yet even in these darkest chapters, Maya people endured. Across remote highland valleys, small communities reknit social bonds around shared hardship, laying the groundwork for the vibrant post-classic societies that would rise centuries later. As we leave behind the silent graves and haunted plazas, one question lingers. Did disease merely follow the path carved by drought and war, or did it deliver the final blow to classic Maya civilization? In our next chapter, we will turn from microscopic foes to the broader ecological collapse that sealed the fate of these great cities. In the wake of relentless drought and unremitting warfare, the very land that had sustained the Maya began to turn against them. For centuries, lowland farmers coaxed bountiful harvests from the tropical soil, but by the late Classic period, fields lay exhausted and eroded. How does an ecosystem, honed by human ingenuity, suddenly collapse under its own success? At the heart of Maya agriculture was the milpa system, a rotational practice of slash and burn that cleared forest plots for maize, beans, and squash. Initially, fallow periods allowed woodlands to regenerate, rebuilding soil fertility. Yet as population swelled and demand for food soared, fallow cycles shortened. Villagers returned to the same plots year after year, stripping nutrients faster than the soil could recover. Without the protective cover of trees, heavy seasonal rains washed topsoil into nearby bajos, turning once fertile valleys into silt-choked lagoons. Can you imagine the shock of a farmer discovering his field reduced to dusty ruts, the granary nearly empty? Beyond the milpa, the Maya engineered raised fields, elevated planting platforms bordered by canals to control water levels. For a time, these chinampas thrived, mitigating drought and flooding alike. But as environmental stress mounted, maintenance of canals and retaining walls fell by the wayside. Sediment built up, reducing water holding capacity, and invasive grasses colonized neglected embankments. The reservoirs meant to buffer dry seasons stagnated, breeding mosquitoes and turning from lifelines into liabilities. What was once a marvel of adaptive management became a monument to human hubris. Deforestation compounded these woes. Sacred groves, once preserved for ceremonial purposes, gave way to fuel and building timber for temple renovations and defensive works. Hillsides stripped of trees lost their ability to anchor soil, triggering landslides in the torrential storms that sometimes followed protracted drought. Entire waterways, arteries of both trade and irrigation, clogged with debris, their channels rerouting unpredictably. How does a kingdom flourish when its rivers refuse to flow as they once did? As the environment degraded, biodiversity plummeted. Wild game retreated from overhunted forests, forcing communities to rely ever more heavily on domesticated crops. Medicinal plants, crucial for treating wounds and fevers, grew scarce. Insect pests, normally kept in check by a balanced ecosystem, flourished in monoculture fields deprived of natural predators. Faced with swarms of locusts and maize weevils, farmers watched helplessly as precious stores of grain were devoured from within their own granaries. The Maya response was both ingenious and desperate. In some regions, they built massive terraces along steep hillsides, trying to slow runoff and rebuild topsoil. In others, they planted intercropping systems, mixing cacao trees, avocado groves, and fruiting shrubs with staple milpas to mimic a forest's layered canopy. But these adaptations required labor and social coordination at a time when political alliances were fracturing and labor forces depleted by warfare. Could scattered initiatives overcome systemic breakdown when the social glue was itself eroding? By the late 8th century, the once vibrant landscape had become a patchwork of barren fields, silt-filled canals, and neglected terraces. The land itself bore witness to the collapse, bareness where green once reigned, mud-choked rivers swallowed by forest regrowth in some places and dried to dust in others. The Maya painted ritual scenes of lush harvests, but the reality on the ground was starkly different. Agricultural infrastructures abandoned, farming communities dispersed, and urban centers unable to feed their populations. Yet even in this ecological void, seeds of future recovery lay hidden. In upland refugia, where elevation provided cooler temperatures and more reliable rainfall, small villages cultivated drought-resistant crops like amaranth and agave. They preserved pockets of old-growth forest around sacred cenotes, recognizing their importance for wildlife, water filtration, and ritual bathing. These practices would inform the post-classic agricultural resurgence, teaching later generations the peril of overtaxing the land. As we close this chapter on environmental collapse, ask yourself, when a civilization's lifeblood, its soil, water, and biodiversity, turns scarce, can human adaptation keep pace with degradation? And what lessons do the Maya offer modern societies grappling with deforestation, soil erosion, and climate extremes? By the close of the 8th century, the classic Maya world lay in fragments. Once proud capitals reduced to silent ruins, regional polities surviving as scattered hamlets. What forces conspired to bring about such widespread unraveling? In this chapter, we weave together the strands of drought, war, disease, and ecological fatigue into a cohesive tapestry, exploring how these interlinked stressors formed a perfect storm. First, reconsider the droughts. Tree ring chronologies and lake sediment cores reveal at least 3 major dry intervals between 650 CE and 850 CE, each lasting a decade or more. These hydrological shocks undermined food production, sparking famine and resource competition. When reservoirs failed and canals dried, the most fundamental human need, water, became a weapon. Yet drought alone cannot explain the pattern of collapse, for some cities endured longer than others. What then amplified these climate stresses into systemic failure? Enter the fires of conflict. As we witnessed in Duz Pilas and Kapan, internecine warfare shattered alliances and diverted labor toward fortifications and military campaigns. Tributes that once flowed as goods and artisans shifted to support soldiers and maintain broken waterworks under siege. When armies targeted reservoirs and agricultural fields, they weaponized the environment itself. In this scorched earth strategy, war magnified the effects of drought, creating cascading failures that reached into the hearts of cities far from battlefronts. Layered atop these crises was the specter of epidemic disease. Malaria, hemorrhagic fevers, and waterborne pathogens preyed on weakened bodies malnourished by crop failures. Markets, once nodes of exchange, became potencies of contagion, sending disease along trade routes. As funerary evidence shows, some communities lost up to 30% of their population in single outbreaks. What happens when priests can no longer guarantee spiritual or physical protection? The divine contract cracked, and public rituals lost their power to unite. Now consider the ecology of decline. Generations of intensive farming stripped hillsides and bajos of topsoil, while deforestation disrupted hydrological cycles. Once ingenious raised fields and terraces fell into disrepair as labor drained away. Biodiversity collapsed, removing natural checks on pests and pathogens. When soil fertility plummeted, crop yields fell below thresholds needed to sustain urban populations. Farmers abandoned distant holdings and moved closer to surviving water sources, leaving hinterlands empty and accelerating social fragmentation. These four dynamic forces, climate stress, war, disease, and environmental degradation, did not operate in isolation but in feedback loops. Famine intensified warfare, siege tactics targeted water and food, malnutrition heightened disease susceptibility, ecological damage exacerbated drought impacts. Together, they formed a reinforcing cycle of decline that few cities could escape. Could any single Maya polity, however resourceful, have withstood this convergence? Still, the collapse was neither uniform nor instantaneous. Some sites, like Chichen Itza and Mayapan, rebounded in the post-classic era, adopting new political structures and trading networks. Highland refugia maintained continuity of practice, preserving cultural memory. These survivors remind us that collapse is a process, not an event, one that unfolds unevenly across space and time. Scholars continue to debate the relative weight of each factor. Was drought the principal trigger, or was political fragmentation the fatal catalyst? How much did disease drive migration patterns? And to what extent did human agency, decisions by rulers, priests, and farmers, either exacerbate or mitigate these crises? As we ponder these questions, one lesson emerges clearly. Complex societies are resilient, but they are also vulnerable to cascading stresses that overwhelm their adaptive capacity. Finally, reflecting on our own era, we must ask, are we repeating Maya mistakes on a global scale? Climate change, geopolitical conflict, pandemic threats, and ecological overshoot loom large. The Maya collapse warns us that when multiple crises intersect, the outcome can be catastrophic. Yet it also shows that innovation, cooperation, and cultural memory can foster recovery, even after profound upheaval. In the next and final chapter, we will draw lessons from the Maya experience, exploring how echoes of their story resonate today, and inviting you to take part in our exploration of history's greatest mysteries. In the centuries since classic Maya cities fell silent, their legacy has echoed across time, whispered in the rhythms of modern ceremonies, etched into the resilience of surviving communities, and inscribed in every glyph we painstakingly decipher. Today, millions of Maya descendants sustain languages like Quechua and Yucatec, honoring ancestral rituals in vibrant festivals and daily offerings at household altars. When you witness a traditional fire ceremony or hear the sonorous call of a shaman's drum, you're not merely observing heritage. You're experiencing a living thread that links past and present, defying the notion of total collapse. Consider the city of Chichen Itza. After centuries of obscurity, its grand pyramid of Kukulkan reemerged as a symbol of cultural resurgence, drawing scholars and pilgrims alike. But beyond tourism, this site inspires local artisans who revive stone carving techniques, painters who reimagine glyph motifs, and farmers who reintroduce heirloom maize varieties once thought lost. These grassroots revivals remind us that collapse is never absolute. Culture regenerates, adapts, and finds new expressions even when its original centers have crumbled. Archaeology, too, plays a pivotal role in this renaissance. Every new excavation, whether revealing a hidden cenote temple or mapping ancient water channels, adds nuance to our understanding. We learn, for instance, that some settlements persisted in marginal uplands precisely because their inhabitants preserved adaptive practices, polyculture gardens, communal forest management, and water harvesting innovations. By studying these refugia, modern agronomists and conservationists glean insights into sustainable land use under climate stress, forging a bridge between ancient ingenuity and 21st century challenges. Yet the most profound echo lies in the Maya example of communal resilience. When centralized states disintegrated, people did not simply vanish. They reorganized around kinship networks, sharing labor, knowledge, and ritual duties. Today, many Maya towns practice tequio, collective work for community benefit, constructing schools, repairing roads, or maintaining irrigation channels. This ethos of shared responsibility stands as a testament to the power of social cohesion when formal institutions falter. What lessons can your community draw from such solidarity in an era of global uncertainty? We also see echoes in environmental stewardship. Contemporary Maya farmers in the Petén region experiment with agroforestry, planting native trees alongside coffee and cacao to restore biodiversity and rebuild soil health. They draw on ancestral wisdom, preserving sacred groves around cenotes, rotating milpas with longer fallow periods, and using organic mulches to retain moisture. In doing so, they craft a living dialogue between past and future, demonstrating how ancient practices can guide sustainable livelihoods today. But perhaps the greatest echo is a cautionary one. The classic Maya collapse warns us that complexity can be both a source of strength and a vulnerability. As our own societies grapple with climate change, pandemics, and political fragmentation, we must ask, are we too entwined in feedback loops that amplify crisis? Will we heed the Maya example by diversifying food systems, reinforcing social bonds, and safeguarding ecosystems before it's too late? Their story urges us to confront these questions not with despair, but with the daring creativity that once built grand cities beneath the jungle canopy. Finally, let us reflect on why we tell these stories. History's greatest mysteries do more than fascinate. They illuminate our collective journey. The Maya collapse is not merely an archaeological puzzle. It is a mirror held up to our age. As you explore these ancient lessons, remember that the same human spirit that carved stele and engineered reservoirs also adapted, endured, and passed wisdom through generations. If you found this journey through Maya history as compelling as I have, join our community of curious minds. Subscribe for more deep dives into lost civilizations, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next adventure. Together, we'll continue to unravel history's enigmas, because the past has much to teach us about our future.